Hello, students learning from home. So today we are going to tackle a pretty tough concept, but I know you guys can get this. What we have been doing at school is learning how to round using a vertical number line. So you learned how to round numbers when you were in 3rd and 4th grade, and you learned that if you're rounding to the nearest 10, you look at the digit next to it to decide if you're going to go up or down. Well, using a vertical number line will make this so much clearer for you. So here, I'm going to take the number 96 and I'm going to round it to the nearest 10. Now the number 96 is in between what two tens? So what I'm asking you is if you picture a number line like this, and I had 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. What two numbers would 96 fall between? Right, it would be in between 90 and 100. So on my vertical number line, I would write 90 as the lower limit, 100 as the upper limit, because I know 96 is either going to round up to 100 or down to 90. The next step is we label our midpoint. So what number is the midpoint or is halfway between 90 to 100? Right, 95. The next step is to plot this number, 96, on my vertical number line. So what I have to do is I have to say, well, if I compare 96 to 95, is 96 greater than 95 or less than 95? Well, we know 96 is greater than 95 because the 9s are the same, but 6 ones is bigger than 5 ones, so that would be 96 is greater than 95. So I would put 96 on my number line right over 95. Then I look at my number line and I decide which way should I round. Well, if the number that you're rounding is at the midpoint or greater, we round up. If the number is below the midpoint, we round down. 96 is above the midpoint, so I'm going to circle 100 because I would round the number 96. If I'm rounding to the nearest 10, I would round it up to 100. Let's try another one. Again, we're going to round to the nearest tens place. The number is 42. Well, if I look up in here on my tens number line, 42 is in between what two numbers? If you said 40 and 50, you are right. 42 is bigger than 40 and less than 50. So it's somewhere in between 40 and 50. Next, and since I'm rounding to tens, that's why I'm counting by tens. Then I find my midpoint. What number is halfway between 40 and 50? Exactly, 45. Then I look at my number that I'm rounding and I compare it to my midpoint. Is 42 less than 45 or greater than 45? If you're thinking less than 45, you're right. I would put my star right about there, 42. 42 is less than 45, so I'm going to round down. When I round the number 42 to the nearest 10, I would round to the number 40. This works for hundreds as well. Here I have the number 248. I'm going to round to the nearest hundreds place. Since I'm rounding to the nearest hundreds, I need my endpoints to be hundreds. So I have to think, what hundreds is this in between? Well, let's look. If I have a number line, and this is 100, and this is 200, 300, 400? Where would this number fall on this number line? Would it be between 1 and 200? Or would it be between 2 and 300? Or would it be between 3 and 400? If you're thinking that the number 248 is in between 200 and 300, you are right. So my lower end point is 200 and my upper end point is 300. The number 248 is somewhere between 200 and 300. Next step, I add my midpoint. What number is halfway between 200 and 300? The answer would be 250. Next, I plot my number. I compare 248 to 250. Would this number be bigger than 250 or less than 250? 248 is less than 250, but not by a lot. So it would be really close. It would be right about there. 248. Then I circle which number I'm going to round to. Would I round this number 248 to 300, rounding it up, or would I round it down to 200? I would round it down to 200 because 248 is less than the midpoint. Are you guys kind of seeing how this works? All right, next one. 765. I'm going to round that number to the nearest hundred. First step, 765 is in between which hundreds? Think of the hundreds. 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1,000. 765 would be in between 700 and 800. Then I add my midpoint. Halfway between 700 and 800 is 750. Next, I plot my number. And I do that by comparing 765 to my midpoint, 750. If 765 is greater than 750, I would plot my point up here. If 765 is less than 750, I would plot my point down here. Well, there's 700s, there's 6 tens and 5 tens. 6 tens is greater than 5 tens, so 765 is greater than 750. I would plot my point right about there. Then I decide which way am I going to round. Is 765 going to round up to 800, or is it going to round down to 700? Well, since I'm above the midpoint, I would round up to 800. And this is how we round with whole numbers using a vertical number line. This is what you would have learned if you were doing Eureka in 4th grade. But you guys are in 5th grade, so we're going to take what we learned here and we are going to apply that to decimals. Now, when you apply it to decimals, a lot of us don't picture the number line right away. So we can use a place value chart to help us. And I'm going to show you how to do this. If you have a dry erase marker, personal whiteboard at home with your dry erase marker, you can follow along and write this. If you have a piece of paper, you can write it on your piece of paper. First thing, you're going to make a place value chart with your tens, ones place, tenths place, hundredths place, thousandths place. Then you're going to write this number in your place value chart. So you can press pause if you need a minute to write this number in. Press play when you're ready to check your work. Okay, you should have written 8 ones, there's your decimal point, 3/10, 6/100, 5/1000. Now, last week we watched a video from Mrs. Taylor, and she showed us that we can rename this number, and we can do it using tenths. So, if I have 8 ones and 3/10, and I want to say that number using only tenths, I could write 83/10, 600, 5/1000. Record that in your place value chart. Then we learned we could rename 83/10 and 600 using only hundreds. 83/10 would be 830 hundredths plus 600 would be 836 hundredths, 5/1000. And then we could even take it one more place value, and we could say 836 hundredths is 8,360 thousandths plus 5, and I would get this number here. This will help you determine your endpoints when you're rounding. And you'll see this follows a pattern. We move the 8 over and we add the 3. We move the 83 over and add the 6. We move the 83 over here. Each time it's getting 10 times bigger because there are 10 tenths in 1 1. There are 10 hundredths in 1/10. There are 10 thousandths in 100th. Okay, now we're going to round to the nearest tens place. Well, when I look at my place value chart, the tens place is going to help me with my endpoints. How many tens are in the number 8 and 365 thousandths? 0, right? This number, when I'm rounding to tens, will give me my lower limit. So down here, I'm going to write 0. Then, to find my upper limit, I'm going to count by the unit. So, if I'm counting by tens, what is 1 10 more than 0? 0, 10. Then, I add my midpoint. What is halfway between 0 and 10? Right, 5. All right, take a minute to label your vertical number line that you drew on your whiteboard. So write tens, draw your number line, label the lower number 0, the upper number 10, and then the midpoint is going to be 5. Next step, you're going to plot this number, 8 and 365 thousandths, on this number line. So think, is 8 greater than 5 or less than 5? Greater than 5. So we would put our star between 5 and 10, probably right around there, 8.365. And then we decide, should we round up or should we round down? Well, 8 and 365 thousandths is greater than our midpoint, so we would round up to 10. So if we're rounding the number 8 and 365 thousandths, we will round up to the nearest 10, which is 10. We can do the same thing with ones. This time we're going to pay attention to our ones column because we're rounding to the nearest ones place. So we're going to do our upper and lower limit. This number will always be this, 8. Then we count up by 1 unit. So we're counting by ones. 8 plus 1 more 1 is 9. The number 8 and 365 thousandths falls somewhere in between 8 and 9. Next we add our midpoint. Halfway between 8 and 9 is 8.5 or 8 and 5/10. Then we plot our number. So we compare 8 and 365 thousandths compared to 8 and 5/10. Is this number greater than or less than 8 and 5/10? the 8s are the same. Then I compare 3/10 to 5/10. 3/10 is less than 5/10, so I'm going to put my star here, like that. Then I look at my vertical number line and I decide which way would I round. If I'm rounding to the nearest ones place, 8 and 365 thousandths is less than my midpoint, so I would round down to 8 and I would circle it. Okay, next, draw a vertical number line for tenths. Look up to the tenths. How many tenths are in this number? 83. My lower limit will be 83 tenths, which we know is 8.3. My upper number, I'm going to add 1 unit, so I'm going to add a tenth because I'm rounding to the tenths. 83 tenths plus 1/10 is 84 tenths, which equals 8.4. Then I have to find my midpoint. For a lot of kids, it's easier to find your midpoint if we rename this number. Instead of saying 8 and 3/10, we could say 8 and 30 hundredths. That doesn't change the value. And instead of saying 8 and 4/10, we could say 8 and 40 hundredths. That doesn't change the value. So now, when I look at this, what is halfway between 30 and 40? Or what is halfway between 8 and 30 hundredths and 8 and 40 hundredths? If you're thinking the midpoint is 8 and 35 hundredths, then you're right. 30, 35, 40. Next step, we compare this number, 8 and 365 thousandths to 8 and 35 hundredths. When I compare those numbers, I see that the 8s are the same, 3/10 are the same, 6 hundredths is greater than 5 hundredths. My star goes here, 8.365. Next, we decide which way to round our number. Would this number, for rounding to the nearest tenth, would it go down to 83 tenths, or would we round up to 84 tenths? Well, this number is greater than the midpoint, so we would round to 84 tenths. 8 and 365 thousandths rounds up to 8 and 4/10 when we're rounding to tenths. Last problem is hundredths. Again, first step, we establish our endpoints. Our lower endpoint is going to be the number of hundredths that are in this number, 836 hundredths. So I can write that in unit form. Or I could write that in standard form. My upper limit is 1 unit more, and now we're counting by hundredths. So 836 hundredths plus 1/100th would give me 837 hundredths. Or, that's unit form, or standard form, 8 and 37 hundredths. Then I need to find my midpoint. A lot of kids think this is easier if we add a 0, which doesn't change the value of that number. Then I would say my midpoint is 8 and 365 thousandths. 360, 365, 370. 8 and 360 thousandths, 8 and 365 thousandths, 8 and 370 thousandths. Next, I take my number, 8 and 365 thousandths, I compare it to my midpoint. Is it greater than or equal to, or less than? Well, this one is actually equal to, so my star goes right there. This is exactly the midpoint. When that happens, if the number is the midpoint or above, we round up. If the number is below the midpoint, we round down. This number is above the midpoint, so I'm going to round up. All right, you guys getting the hang of this? All right, we're going to do one more problem, and then I'm going to let you do some practicing. This one we're going to do together, but I'm going to have you do a little bit more of the work. So what I want you to do first, you can erase your dry erase board or get another piece of paper. You're going to make your place value chart, tens, ones, tenths, hundreds, thousandths. Next, you are going to fill in your place value chart. You can press pause and do that right now. Okay, you should have written 4 ones, 3 tenths, 2 hundredths, and 8 thousandths. Then you go through the process of renaming your numbers so that you have the most number of tenths. So go ahead and press pause, do that, and then press play. Okay, I'm sure you wrote 43 tenths, 2 hundredths, 8 thousandths. Now press pause again, and this time rewrite this number with the most possible hundredths. Press play when you're ready to check your work. All right, you probably wrote 43 tenths would change to 432 hundredths and 8 thousandths. Next, rewrite this number using only thousandths. Press play when you're ready to check your work. All right, you wrote 4,328 thousandths. Okay, your place value chart should look like this. If it doesn't, press play and fix it. You want it to look like this. This will help you with your rounding. Then we are going to use our vertical number lines. So now on your paper, you're going to draw a vertical number line, tens. That means we're rounding to the nearest 10. How many tens are in this number? 4 and 328 thousandths. 0. So label your endpoints based on what we know. What would be the lower limit and the upper limit? Think, what tens places does 4 fall in between? Press play when you're ready. Okay, you probably wrote 0, 10. Next, label your midpoint. The midpoint is 5. Next step, place a star on the number line where you would plot 4 and 328 thousandths. Is that less than 5 or is that number greater than 5? Once you draw your star, press pause, draw your star, and then press play when you're ready to check. Okay, you probably drew your star somewhere there. 4 and 328 thousandths. Next step, circle 0 if you think you'll round down, or 10 if you think you'll round up. This number would be rounded to the nearest 0. All right, press pause and finish your vertical number lines. When you are ready to check your work, press play. Okay, welcome back. Let's check and see how you did. When you rounded to the nearest ones place, you look up at your ones. This number, the 4, gives you your lower number, 4, your lower endpoint. Then we count by units. We're counting by ones. 4 ones, 5 ones. Next, you write in your midpoint. What is halfway between 4 and 5? halfway is 4 5/10. Then you put a star where you would plot this number. 4 328,000. Is it greater than 4 5/10 or is it less than 4 5/10? Well, we know 3/10 is less than 5/10, so we would write our number here, 4 328,000. And then we circle the number we're rounding to. If we're rounding up, we circle 5. If we're rounding down, we circle 4. In this case, the number is less than 4 5/10, so I would circle 4. All right, then I'm going to round to the nearest tenths. So this is the part of the chart that's going to help me. I'm going to label my vertical number line. My lower limit will be 43/10 in unit form, which equals 4.3 in standard form. I'm going to count by tenths, and I'm going to go up 1 unit. 43/10 plus 1/10 is 44/10, which equals 4 4/10. Now you might have done a midpoint here and just did it right from these numbers, but some students like to add the 0, makes it easier to see. And then you wrote your midpoint. Halfway between 4 30/100 and 4 40/100 is 4 35/100. Then we go back to our original number, 4 328,000. We compare that. Is this number less than 4 35/100 or is this number greater than 4 35/100? Well, on your paper, you probably looked and saw the 4s were the same, the 3/10 were the same, but this has 2/100 and this has 5/100. 2/100 is less than 5/100, so we would write it right here, 4 328,000. Next step, circle the number you're rounding to. Would this number round up or would this number round down? This number would round down. When we round 4 328,000 to the nearest tenth, we round to 4 3/10. All right, checking your last answer. We're now rounding to the nearest hundredths place. So we look up in our chart and we find the hundredths, 432 hundredths. That's our lower number. 432 hundredths. That's how we say it in unit form. In standard form, it's 4.32. Then we count up by 1 unit. So we're counting by hundredths. 432 hundredths plus 1/100th is 433 hundredths, which is in unit form, but we can write that in standard form like this. Next, we find our midpoint. A lot of kids think it's easier if we add a 0. What is halfway between 4 320,000 and 4 330,000? It would be 4 325,000. Next, we're going to compare our number. Here we have 4 328,000. Here we have 4 325,000. The 4s are the same. The 3/10 are the same. The 2/100ths are the same. So we look at our thousandths place. 8,000ths is greater than 5,000ths. So our star goes here, 4.328. Then we decide which way are we rounding. This number is above the midpoint, so we're going to round to 4 33/100. When we round the number 4 328,000 to the nearest hundredth, we would round up to 4 33/100. So that is how you round using a vertical number line. Next, I want you to practice on your own. So you are going to do the problem set. Listen carefully, because some of these are really tricky. For number 1, I want you to do number 1, but I only want you to round it to the nearest tens. Don't do the hundredths, don't do the tenths. For number 2, you can round all of them. The tricky part of this one is they don't give you a hundreds column. So you're going to start off naming the most tens. 115 would be 11 tens, 5 ones, 3 tenths, 7 hundredths, 6 thousandths, and you can do the rest of this problem. I would like you to do that. Number 2. Then you're going to turn this over, in your workbook. This is lesson number 7, problem set. And you're going to do number 3. You can completely fill out your place value chart, and you can do all of your vertical number lines just like we did for practice. Number 4 and 5 are what we call may-dos. If you want to do more work and you can figure these out, go for it. But the must-dos are number 1, rounding to the nearest tens, number 2, and number 3. All right, do your best, and I will talk to you tomorrow.